Thank you both so much for taking the time to chat with me. I am a huge fan of just the DC universe, first and foremost. So I have loved seeing the continued success of Harley Quinn. How does it feel to have this show be at a point where we have tie-in comics, we have merchandise, we have spin-offs, and I feel like a whole new generation of fans loving Harley and Ivy? How does it feel as creators?
Oh my gosh. I mean, it's an absolute dream come true. And we, speaking of DC Universe, which was also the name of the streaming service on which Harley premiered, we kind of had these humble beginnings, on a very niche streaming service. And, it was sort of like this bird in the hand situation where when we pitched the show to the studio, they were like, okay, well, we really like the pitch. We have a couple of options. One, we could go and take it to Netflix. They're interested. Maybe you get a pilot order. Who knows, Amazon, wherever. Or there is this burgeoning streaming service that we have called DC Universe, and if you take it there, we'll just pick it up for 26 episodes immediately. So it was kind of a no-brainer to it. Like we made the decision very quickly. We were like, well, yes, like they're going to pay for us to make 26 of these right out of the gate. That's so rare. Like it's too, you have to do it. But it is like the little show that could, and it kind of refused to die, even though we've gone through like multiple regimes at both DC and Warner Brothers, and then its actual the streaming service changed, and who knows what awaits it down the road, which we can probably get into later in the interview, but yeah, I mean, it's just phenomenal, and it's also just, I mean, I grew up a comics nerd. I so this was my world. Like when we were coming up with the pitch, I was pulling stuff from like Grant Morrison's book, Super God's book. There were concepts that he talked about like that were really inspirational in like defining like the tone and the look of the show, and it was really his like or their sort of idea that like you can make Gotham City look like whatever you want. It sort of like comes down to who is the main story, like whose eyes are you seeing it through. And we're like, right, Harley, like it's Harley, it's not Batman. It's like Gotham is like her playground. And so like, I don't know, like just being inspired by all the comics that came before and all the creators who came before, it was a dream come true for me to like take those stories and like do our own version of them, or just little subtle seeds of an idea that we've lifted from comic arcs that we made our own, and then to be able to like meet the creators of these books who now like watch the show and like the show and are very openly complimentary of the show is really awesome. I just met Tom King. Well, this was the second time. This is the first time I was sober. And I went down at Comic-Con with Mitch Gerrards, and having Tom say to me like, "Oh my God, like the billboard for Kite Man is like out at the Warner Brothers lot, and like when I'm going there to work on like the DC TV shows and movies, like I'm snapping photos with it and sending to my friends." And that was just really super gratifying because like I idolize these people. So yeah, it's awesome. Sorry, that's very long-winded.
No, that was perfect. I do have to say before you add anything, Justin, I have a copy of Super Gods over there that is like earmarked and has a million tabs in it. So I completely understand. You were
Yeah,
talking
such a good
to,
book.
yeah, it is. It's incredible. So, Justin, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it was like, I had kind of, I was coming at it from a completely different angle than Pat. I didn't grow up a huge comic book person, but I grew up a huge fan of adult animation and of BTAS. That show was very formative for me. So it was really exciting, I think, for me to be able to like bring our sense of humor to these characters and then see if it was going to catch. I remember when we were like first doing the show, Warner Brothers was kind of like, what the fuck is this? And we actually had to test the show first to like prove to them that like it works, like people will like this. But in the background we were like, will people like this? So to be able to see like a generation of people who maybe they were comic book fans, maybe they weren't, but this connected with them in some way has been really gratifying to see these characters take on their own sort of thing in that universe, to see like what our Bane has become, what our Commissioner Gordon has become, is really fun.
I was going to
Yeah.
ask about Bane, I'd have to say, because he has been delightful since Harley started. How does it feel to kind of have let him shine in that way across this tenure, and then also like have him be in Kite Man in such a major way?
I mean, he very quickly became a fan favorite in the room. Like once we knew what James Adomian's take was on the voice, obviously riffing on what Tom Hardy did with Dark Knight Rises, but he is just he's a character that's like it's very easy to put him in there too much just because everything out of James's mouth is super funny. So yeah, I mean, I feel like weirdly enough, like with the Kite Man spinoff, Bane became like the kind of the constant, between two shows. And I think like if we ever were to get like another spinoff, there's a very good chance that like, Bane's going to be in that one too. So yeah, I mean it's funny though because you talk about like with my background in the comics and knowing like who Bane is kind of canonically with the publishing side, there was a time where I was like, hey, what if like it just all of this turns out to be a ruse and Bane actually is, much like in the comics, the smartest guy in the room. And then everybody like threw pens at me and I was like, okay. So I relented and they were right. But yeah, I love that there is yet I would call him like the third perhaps notable iteration of Bane. And yeah, it's awesome. It's great. It's super gratifying. He tested very well. Justin was talking about focus group testing. We tested a couple animatics when we were trying to figure out like, okay, like are the fans going to bristle at what we're doing because it's like too irreverent? Or will they kind of like get it? Will they embrace it? And sure enough, they totally embraced it, and especially Bane in a big way.
I love that. So I was reading a little bit about the two of you's involvement with season one of Kite Man and how you really let Dean kind of take the reins for a lot of the show. Now that the season is out into the world and everyone has seen it, how do you guys, as producers and fans, what are you the proudest of?
Oh man, I feel like Dean and Katie Rich, who did the show with him, and the whole writing staff, Chris Mars. I was really, I really wanted to make sure that Kite Man had its own tone, that it lived within the Harley universe, but that it didn't feel like Harley. Like I would say, like for me personally, I can tend to like want to tell sort of like darker stories that sort of like live in this kind of emotional gray area, and left to my own devices can sort of like end on sour notes and things like that, because I like the sort of like moral ambiguity. And I really didn't want Kite Man show to be like that, because I feel like you don't need a lot of that, and I think Pat and I balance each other out really well in that way on Harley. And I think on Kite Man, Dean and Katie just wanted to make like the most fun and sort of sweet. It's a sweet show. It's like, it's a lot sweeter than you might think for a show that's, about a toilet that when you take a shit in it, it goes to another dimension. And so I'm just really impressed with what they did. All credit to them, but Pat and I and Dean wrote the pilot, and I remember we had in our early meetings, we talked about that toilet, but
Yeah.
I think it's really impressive what they've done. I like that it's a sweet, goofy show about two nerds.
Yeah. It's funny. At first, it made it sound like the show is actually built around the toilet, but it's about so much more.
The art with the toilet is incredible, though, I do have to say.
The portal potty. Yeah, I mean, the other thing too is like when we pitched Harley, it was like, okay, it's Mary Tyler Moore. If Mary Tyler Moore were a psychopathic killer, with Kite Man, it was like it's the sort of thumbnail pitch, or the elevator pitch was it's cheers for supervillains. And so yeah, I mean, we definitely as two people that grew up watching kind of like those classic sitcoms, like 80s 90s sitcoms, like it sort of became like a useful shorthand to us, to find like a different kind of famous ensemble comedy from which we could kind of just borrow like the general concept, because you know it works, but you haven't seen it with these characters. So yeah.
I love that. So another member of the Kite Man cast that I do have to ask about is Lance Reddick, because his performance hits so much harder now given the circumstances of everything. What was it like
Yeah.
to kind of have brought him into the fold with the show and have helped kind of bring one of his last performances to the screen?
Well, I mean, Dean and Katie, especially, and Chris Mars, another one of our upper level writers, producers, they all actually, worked directly with Lance in the recording booth. So Justin and I can't speak to that because, we did that stuff on Harley, but when we sort of bequeathed the showrunner title to those guys and lady, um, they were the ones who were in with all the voice records. But just for us as fans of kind of peak TV, and streaming, television, like to have somebody like him, with such all that gravitas that he brings, was amazing. And it's very tragic and what happened, and we miss him. But I mean, we're honored to be a part of his legacy.
Yeah, and I'm really excited that I know people have seen him, in certain comedies here and there pop in, but like the dude was super funny.
Mm.
And I mean, he's known for playing all these sort of like hard ass characters and dramas, but like his ear for comedy, and again, I speak only as just a fan who watched these episodes. I wasn't in the record. It was really something. Talented guy.
That's beautiful. So, I do have to. One thing I'm very curious about is beyond sharing a couple cast members. How do you feel that working on Abbott has helped kind of the continued journey of Harley and Kite Man? Because it's been interesting to see certain members of the cast come over to the show, but I'm curious from behind the scenes perspective how it has been for you guys.
Yeah, I was gonna say, well, Quinta and Tyler were a Hawk Girl and Hawkman in our Valentine's special, which you're alluding to, which was amazing. And obviously Janelle James taking over as Queen of Fables and Kite Man was an awesome addition as well. Um, both shows that are each show kind of scratches a different itch for us. Obviously, there's a lot of stuff in Harley that we would never be able to get away with on ABC. So it's a kind of a wish fulfillment fantasy in that respect. But I do think, there is a little bit of overlap there, and that I do think at the end of the day, despite the sort of operatic characters that we have in Harley, it is emotionally grounded as much as Abbott is. At its core is an ensemble of very, very funny characters. It does deal, both shows deal with kind of office romance, let's call it. So yeah, there's a little bit of overlap there as well. We every show takes on its own life, right? And even though we're like the showrunners of those shows, there is a huge ensemble of cast and crew and writers that are all kind of putting their own spin on stuff. So we're putting our stamp on stuff. I think you can see it in both shows, but obviously they also take on a life of their own. But both are very, very gratifying to work on, I have to say, and have really, really spirited fan bases that are super supportive. Which
That probably have never met each other.
probably not.
I feel like there is some overlap. I know enough nerds who definitely watch both shows, but I totally get what you mean.
I think they're both comedies, and since there's basically like 8 comedies on TV, if you like to laugh, you might watch them.
So one thing that I've been curious about now that Kite Man's out into the world, I know you guys cannot talk spoilers in any sort of way, but can you tease just on a like big picture level what the ending kind of means for the future of both shows and like what we could potentially see in the future, even just from like a thematic standpoint?
It's a toughie. We're still waiting to find out if there is a future.
Okay.
You'll see Harley season 5 hopefully soon. We don't have the exact air date. So there is that to look forward to, which just, continues sort of the story of Harley and Ivy's relationship. I could tease that there's a big sort of location move with that. I actually think it's there's been a teaser that's been presented at Comic-Con, so I don't think I'm saying anything out of school when I say that like a lot of the show, this season 5 takes place in Metropolis. Harley and Ivy decide to sort of spice up their relationship with a change of scenery.
Yeah, we liked the idea, and again, we usually we'll have like a meeting or something with the showrunner if we're not running the show and we're hiring somebody to do it, or in this case, Dean, who co-created it with us. We'll sort of have like a big picture talk about it, and I can say we were very interested in the idea that Metropolis is always this like beautiful shining city on the hill, and Gotham just is a cesspool, and that it almost feels like Gotham is like subsidized for Metropolis's gain. So we were interested in that idea.
I agree with Justin.
Awesome. So another DC project that I do have to ask about, I've been seeing a lot of love for Powerless on social media lately, and I love that because I loved that show. I feel like it definitely did not get its due while it was on the air. But how do you guys feel about kind of the stamp you were able to put on that show and on like the civilian side of DC all of those years ago?
Well, I mean, look, we're very fortunate to have, come into that show in several ways. But like one, it was kind of our introduction to DC just as like an entity. And I like the regime has changed, but, we got in there in about, I think it was 2016 when we did Powerless. And at the time, like Jeff Johns was running things. And, Jim Lee was sort of also one of the higher ups. But so there's been some consistency with Jim. But yeah, I mean, I feel like that show, we came into it in a strange way. We were consulting producers on it, and then we were sort of asked to run it eventually, which was a little bit of a surprise to us. And then when we did become the showrunners, we did kind of fundamentally change it. It started out as like an insurance company that dealt with the fallout of superhero battles, and then we sort of went on more of like a Better Off Ted angle where it was like more about the gadgetry and stuff. And I think our inclination at least was to embrace more of like the Silver Age kind of like zaniness, and as the show, and this is a good kind of, I think, anecdote of like TV in a nutshell, and sort of success in failure is just this idea that like, I think that the network, like, I think at a certain point they were sort of like, yeah, this is just, we're not going to order any more of these. But like they hadn't canceled it, but they were definitely like no longer inclined to prioritize the show, let's say. And with that, sort of came more of a hands-off approach from them, and they didn't sort of put any reins on us as far as like the wackiness. And so I think like by about episode 6, which I believe was the episode when Vanessa Hudgens' character started dating a guy who turned out to be Robert Buckley from iZombie, who we knew from iZombie, having worked with him. He turned out to be Riddler's henchman, or one of them. And that was when we were like, okay, like this is like kind of the promise of the premise for us, and making good on that. And then we started doing stuff where like, they're taking business meetings with like Atlanteans, and we started bringing in some more actual like capes into the story, which, at the time there was, it was a little bit more restrictive as far as like what we could do, which is sort of the beauty of Harley, and where it was like, do whatever. And part of that was like, so just as a counterpoint, we had on Powerless, we really did have to kind of like thread a needle. There would be a lot of questions asked, or by us, as in like, can we use this person or this gadget or whatever? And it would have to go through a lot of, executive emails, because they had a lot of stuff going on in live action world. And even though we took place in our own Earth, we called it Earth P. um, it was still, by virtue of being a live action show in a sea of DC live action shows with like the whole like Arrowverse and all of that stuff, it became trickier for what, DC was interested or willing to do. But by the end of it, we were like dealing with like portals to other dimensions, and Adam West was guest starring as like a board member of, of Wayne Enterprises, and like that stuff was like the fan servicey stuff, but also the stuff that was servicing like this fan got really, really interesting and fun to us. So yeah, it's funny, like anecdotally, like you'll occasionally see somebody tweet about missing Powerless, and it's cool to remember. But yeah, that was a tough one too. It was a puzzle figuring out that show, and yeah, I don't know. Maybe it was ahead of its time. I don't know.
I think it was, certainly. Justin, do you have anything to add?
No, I mean, it was like the classic case of like, once we got shitty ratings, they left us alone because they didn't care anymore, and we could just make the show we wanted to make.
Yeah. Much more succinct way of saying what I said. Thank you for recapping.
I love it. So for my last question, I know at this point you guys have done years of interviews about Harley, about this whole universe. What is one thing you've always wanted to talk about or always wanted people to ask you and it have never been asked?
Oh,
it's a good question.
Ask a lot of questions, so I'm going through the Rolodex of questions that I've been asked.
Yeah, I guess no one's ever asked us if the characters we ended up having in Harley were any different than the characters that we originally pitched the show with.
Ooh.
And we originally pitched the show. Killer Croc was part of their crew. And we had also, Pat, you remember this. We had also created our own superhero that we wanted to have in the supervillain that we wanted to have in her crew, who was named Brownstone, but everyone called him Brownstain because during a high-profile rescue as a hero, he shit his pants on live TV. And so everyone called him Brownstain, and then that's what turned him into a villain, is because he was so upset at that. And so then he took refuge in Harley's crew. And DC said, we have 20,000 supervillains and superheroes. Can you just find one of those? And we said, okay.
Yeah, I mean, they were right.
Yeah, they were totally right. By the way, 100% right. Brownstain should not have been one of the characters in the show. DC has plenty of characters that they were letting us have carte blanche with. DC made absolutely the right call. This is not me saying, justice for Brownstain. This is me saying it's just an interesting part of the Harley lore that never happened.
Yeah. I think early on we definitely were gravitating towards some other characters that felt like sort of low hanging fruit, or just like they were just like a gag, like a very like one dimensional gag, and fortunately, enough people were like encouraged us to go deeper. Like we had like Dex Star, the Red Lantern cat that vomits blood, just because we were like, oh, blood vomiting cat's funny. He should be part of the crew.
I think one of the things that maybe would surprise people about how we made Harley, or at least how Pat and I ran Harley for the first 3 years, is that we broke the stories. If you sat in on the writer's room for the first like day of each week's story breaking, it would sound like we were breaking a really emotional like drama because we would start with like, what's the like emotional story we want to tell with Harley? And it wasn't until we kind of unlocked that then we get to some of the big, silly, like comedic set pieces in the show and how do we do that. But the first first day or two of breaking each story is like these like dramatic, emotional cores to each episode.
My mind is blown right now. Everything you guys have just told me is unbelievable. That is so cool. I will say justice for Brownstone because that is kind of an incredible concept. Thank you both so much for taking the time to talk, and congrats on your continued success. I'm going to be rooting for you guys on the Emmys. Like it's so cool to get to talk to you both.
Thank you so much, Jenna. Nice to meet you.